So here's me thinking, okay, maybe Kingdom of the Crystal Skull can just go down as that one-off bad one, and that Dial of Destiny will be the ultimate comeback for our beloved whip-cracking fedora wearer. Well, last night my dreams were crushed, when I unfortunately discovered that nothing could be further from the truth. Nah, who am I kidding? We all saw this coming. Put simply, the Dial of Destiny is what happens when you have a ridiculously huge budget with unrealistic return expectations, a plethora of studio interference heavily exerting the unspoken rules of diversity quota regardless of individual talent, and not to mention a well past his due date 80-year-old man whom, once again, has had his iconic character stripped down and humiliated, all as part of an aim to relegate him to be a useless, deferring side piece in his own story. Setting Indy up so that he can be replaced by a stronger, smarter female lead and thus hand down the fedora in order for her to lead the franchise into the future? It never even crossed my mind. So with sheer and utter enthusiasm, let's whip out our walking sticks and limp right into the plot, shall we? We interrupt this video with a warning. A warning of the plot being so bland, I feel me going over it will probably take you out of this video. But if you do want to hear it, refer to the linked video in the description. But otherwise, continue listening to the complaints of a toxic fan, folks. Upon leaving the cinema, I can't say I was at all surprised with what we got. The Critical Drinker has made a valid point of that when you have such a high budget for a movie, in this case around $300 million, yikes, the studio are going to want to play it safe. Safe in that we have a generic story centered around a MacGuffin object that does something. This something drives the bad guys to pursue it in lust of their own personal gain. And in pure originality, these guys are Nazis. And our heroes are in pursuit of it in order to 1. Stop the bad guys, and 2. To finish off what someone else, i.e. Basil, started. A pretty basic premise which on paper ties in with the low-risk approach they were clearly going for. But the problem lies within how it's all conveyed. These movies, at least the first 3, were known for being able to keep you on the edge of your seat constantly, with the perfect balance of action, humour, mystery, intrigue, romance, and so on. I'll use slight humour in Raiders as an example. Barely 5 minutes in, we see Indy be portrayed by his accomplice who exclaims, "Adios, señor," and runs off, leaving Indy to die or whatever. And when Indy pulls through and shortly discovers his dead body, "Adios, Sapiro." Funny shit that pays off, right? Whereas in The Dial, I think the most humorous thing we got, if you can even classify it as such, was Suller's recital of his famous "Give him hell, Indiana Jones" line. But at the same time, it kind of rubs salt in the wound, making me mourn the superior movie. Or how about character introduction? Last Crusade is a good example. The way we're introduced to Indy's father is when he literally smashes a vase over Indy's head and mistaking him for a Nazi intruding in his cell. He then proceeds to examine the vase, proclaiming that it's a fake and expressing no concern for his son having been injured. This tells us a lot about his character in a matter of seconds while being stupidly hilarious. Compare that with the introduction of Basil. He's interrogated by the Nazis on the train, with some self-exposition of his occupation being so basic it borderline breaks the fourth wall. It's something along the lines of, "I'm a professor and archaeologist at Oxford University." Now, being such an integral character and part of Indy's life, you'd think his introduction would have been a bit more epic. Seeing Harrison Ford put the fedora back on was a bit of a double-edged sword. While he certainly does the best he can with what he's given and easily slips comfortably back into the role, there's no denying that the guy is just too fucking old for this. He was pushing it 13 years ago as it was, and while I know that unlike Star Wars, he's actually quite enthusiastic about Indy, there comes a time in life where you need to wake up and smell the bacon, so to speak. Having said that, it was at least a nice moment between him and Marion at the end. Just too bad we had to wait like 2.25 hours to get there. Mads Mikkelsen, who you may remember from Casino Royale or Fantastic Beasts, seems to have become the go-to for modern villains. Like Ford, he does the best he can with the material given to him, but as Voller or Dr. Schmidt, while quite clearly a reference to Werner von Braun, one of the former Nazi scientists employed by NASA in the 60s, leaves a lot to be desired. Indiana Jones has never really had a heavy emphasis on iconic villains, but the earlier films at least utilised what they had. For example, I'm sure most of you have that scene in Raiders of Tote threatening Marion with the hot poker while illuminating his evil face burned into the back of your eyeballs. Why? Because his line delivery as well as the camera and lighting techniques were fucking brilliant, and it showed what his character was capable of, establishing a real threat. Here, I think the most Schmidt does is shoot a CIA agent when she attempts to capture him and his men, threatening to disavow him. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have some sadistic, murderous tyrant as your villain, but something that at least showed the guy meant business would have been nice. But these are only minor compared to the movie's deepest flaw. And I'm just going to say it,
It's Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character of Helena. She's just so friggin' unlikable. You know what makes a character awesome? The ability to relate to them. What do 99.9% of humans inevitably endure throughout their life? Struggle. Once we persevere through said struggle, what are we landed with? Lessons, personal development, growth, achievement. And is there anything better than seeing someone who was once way out of their depth against a certain opposing force eventually overcome that force and grow as a person? With Helena, we get none of that. Right from the get-go, she's a flawless, invincible force that buckles to no one. From the Spider-Man jumps across the rooftops, when she's physically taking out man after man in the bar fight, knocking more men out of the cart things when they're in Morocco, climbing the wheel arches of the Nazi plane to get inside, and of course knocking Indiana Jones himself out, it's clear she has superhuman strength, while at no point ever being injured, let alone showing any sign of weakness. At one point she's hanging from the soon-to-crash Nazi plane below Indy, and for a moment it actually seems like he's going to be able to save her. But no, hang on, she reaches for a pistol while clinging onto the plane with her other hand, and shoots a Nazi who was about to attack Indy from behind and rescues herself. And it's not just limited to the physical, she's also manipulative, self-indulgent, and narcissistic. Her motives for pursuing the doll are quite clearly more for personal gain of wealth and material rather than her dead father's legacy. It's not until far into the film where Indy states how wrong it'd be to try auction the thing that her motive for it apparently changes. When Indy's friend Ronaldo is executed by the Nazis, she doesn't for the least bit understand that he's hurt. And when he makes it clear, she responds with a cold, "sorry," before they head off. Or how about when her ex-love affair is introduced? While the guy is clearly as mad as a bat, Helena makes it clear that she'll do whatever she needs to do for her own gain, which isn't limited to sleeping around with those who she can gain from. Who's the villain in this film again? Imagine the Twitter mob reactions if a guy did the same thing. But anyway, above all else is her humiliation of Indy. Whether she's reminding him he needs to take his medicine, making fun of his old frail body compared to her own while they're scaling a wall, or straight up leaving him to be executed by the bad guys, it's clear that Helena, as well as Lucasfilm as a whole, have no respect for Indiana Jones as a fictional person, nor as a character. In fact, I'm thoroughly convinced that they outright hate him. They hate everything that he stood for and represented. Bravery, courage, perseverance, the willingness to get back up no matter how many times you get shat on. Oh, and not to mention, just being a fucking man. And while like Han Solo, Indy may have been torn apart, emasculated and humiliated, there's one thing that they can't take away, and that's 3 timeless classics that we'll all be able to enjoy for as long as home entertainment exists, which I'm sure will be around for longer than any of us. Now I know that ramped up quite abruptly, but Indiana Jones is a character I'm very passionate about. Like most of you, I grew up watching the 3 movies and couldn't get enough of them. I think there's a good reason so many men credit Indiana Jones as being the man they wish they could be, whether they say it out loud or not. And so to see Lucasfilm and Disney try to paint the message in this film that such a great character and everything he represents is entirely wrong and unacceptable, it pisses me off, you know? And none of this is to say that director James Mangold did a bad job. In fact, you could say he did a good job, and that of delivering the exact movie that Disney wanted. Whether it were him or someone else in the director's chair, we still would have received the same shitty final product all the same, and I'm sure he'll have gladly taken his fee and run, so fair play to him, I guess. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe or what have you. It's all only too much appreciated. But alas, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.